This flexible and robust platform that has allowed you to innovate. We're now going to hold our first panel session with a very significant topic for all of us working on technology and the cloud. It has to do with security. We're going to invite our Chief Security Officer from Rackspace. He comes from the headquarters and will talk to us a bit about the trends. And I think he's going to bring some customers with him. Remember the hashtag? That is where you can send your questions so that by the second panel session, we can have your questions with us. So without further ado, I invite Brian to please come to the stage.
Thank you. Hola, buenos dias. That was Spanish with a little Boston accent mixed in. I will be best to speak English to you. Cybersecurity has arguably become the biggest business issue of our day, and as such has become a board-level issue. It's evolved from a perceived technology issue to now a significant business challenge that could have a material impact on just about any company. Cloud provides unique opportunity, as all of us in this room know, to transform the way we live and the way we work. Yet security is often singled out as an inhibitor to cloud adoption. So what we want to do in the short amount of time we have today is address some of these questions around cybersecurity. And obviously we would be very happy to speak with you throughout the day if you have any specific questions. I'm very honored to be joined on stage by two gentlemen I have immense respect for. Paul Kurtz, Chief Executive Officer of TrueStar, and James Philippi is an Executive Director with Ernst & Young. So join me in welcoming them. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Brian.
So let's start in just a few seconds and kind of introduce yourselves. Let us know a little bit about your background.
Great. Hi, as Brian said, I'm Paul Kurtz, CEO of TrueStar. Spent the first half of my career in the U.S. government, working at the State Department and the White House on the National Security Council, working on counterterrorism, got involved in cybersecurity around 1999-2000. Have been involved in cybersecurity since, either in the government since, working with people on Capitol Hill, working internationally in Abu Dhabi, helping people in the Middle East work on cybersecurity, and now, of course, at TrueStar, where we're helping companies work together, exchanging incidents and collaborating.
And my name is James Philippi. I lead the cyber threat management services globally for Ernst & Young. And cyber threat really includes 6 capabilities. Those are cyber threat intelligence, monitoring, response, vulnerability management and identification, and software security. And then my responsibilities also include our US-based Advanced Security Center located in Houston.
Yeah, very good, thanks. Good to have you guys here. Well, let's tackle our first question. We'll jump right into it. The question is, are we doing enough to combat cyber attacks? It's interesting when we watch these breaches in our newspapers and on our TV programs, it almost feels as if we accept these as a cost of doing business. And I believe that there's really a lot more that can be done nationally as well as corporately. So let's kick that around for a second. Paul, what do you think from a Washington perspective? Are we doing enough?
Well, a couple pieces to this. Number one, I'm a positive thinker in thinking that every enterprise wants to do the best they can, given the resources and the skill sets they have, to combat cyber attacks, to keep the bad guys out as best they can. The problem is the bad guys now are working far more rapidly than they were even 2 or 3 years ago. We see this in the States right now with the ransomware attacks against hospitals, attacking multiple institutions at the same time. And so what we have at the traditional model, so to speak, is each enterprise is acquiring the software and hardware and people to defend itself, but it's no longer sufficient. It's not enough. And so we need to, if you will, change the paradigm to enable companies to work together more, such as Rackspace is doing and working with other cloud providers to provide security. So that's piece one. Piece two is what's government doing to help. And in the United States, we actually have had a bit of a step forward in that the US Congress and the President agreed to what's called the Cybersecurity Act of 2015, which recognizes that in order to really beat the bad guys, we have to have a situation where the good guys can work together. And so now there's liability protection, antitrust relief, and the ability of private enterprises to work together to exchange incident data and to collaborate far more easily. So it's definitely a mixed picture, but I think it doesn't need to be all fear, uncertainty, and doubt. There are ways we can do better. Final point is, I think we all need to recognize that we can continue to acquire technologies to secure each individual enterprise, so to speak, buying a better mousetrap, but those mousetraps are all going to have a bad day. They're going to fail. And so the degree we can think about working with each other amongst good guys will be in a much better spot.
Yeah. I mean, James, in order for us to fight corporately and nationally, I think we have to kind of share a view of the threat and the risks. Is that possible? I mean, do we have a universal view today, in your belief?
Well, I think right now there is a real misunderstanding broadly about risk. I recently attended a conference for metals and mining, and in advance of that, all the participants were given this briefing about the sector, and the briefing included the top 20 business risks, things like productivity and health and safety and environmental issues, all that are pertinent to that sector. And number 11 on the list was cyber.
Yeah.
And in my presentation to that group, I talked about how cyber had an element in each of these business risks. Productivity, hacktivists may attack your production environments and cause lack of production. Health and safety, there may be, again, activists that want to disrupt things so that you have health and safety issues. And so understanding that business and cyber are inextricably intertwined, I think is an important element that a lot of organizations aren't there yet.
Yeah.
Once organizations understand that cyber and business are intertwined like that, it allows them to then put a different value on their critical assets. Understanding what your intellectual property is, what is truly valuable to your organization, allows you then to build a security strategy that prioritizes those things. And until we get there more universally, I think a lot of organizations are still treating this as an IT issue and not understanding the connection yet.
Yeah, yeah. And implicit in what you're telling us is the need for us to share information. And this is a topic that we've been talking about for many, many years. And there's a number of point of views about whether we're actually being successful. And actually, I would love to get both of your point of views. Are we really being successful in information sharing?
Not too much so far. Let me try to unpack that. I think there is, to a degree, some level of sharing of incident data and threat reporting, but it's often too late, or the data is not actionable. There's, in the security space, people talk about indicators of compromise, or tactics and procedures that the bad guys are using. And what often happens is that data stays inside the enterprise. It's not shared between enterprises. Naturally, if you're attacked, you're hit, your inclination is to sit on the data. You want to investigate it as best you can before you talk to others about it. And so that's been a real inhibitor. There's also, that's the market issue that's at play, but there's the legal issues that are at play. Do I want to share something and be subject to discovery or liability Or a real concern in the United States is, well, if I shared information with Brian about an attack and he takes mitigative action based upon the information I give him and it goes wrong, can Brian come back and sue me? And that's been a legitimate issue in the United States. And then the final reason, at least in the US, and I can't say it's the same in Latin America, is working closely with government. Am I going to be perceived, if I tell government I've had a problem, is government going to come regulate me more? Or if I work too closely with government, is that going to be bad for my customer base, especially in the United States in the wake of Edward Snowden? There's this angst, there's this nervousness about being seen as too close to the US government. So all that's created a situation where we have a long way to go in sharing, but we have the building blocks in place that I think we can use to go forward. I'll let James expand.
No, I agree. Beyond the brand concerns and the legal and regulatory concerns and the competitive advantage, as well as the value am I getting in return the effort that I'm putting into sharing. I think even more fundamentally than that, many organizations don't effectively know how to use that data. They don't have the programmatics around intelligence. So while organizations today are doing a better job of taking tactical intelligence and putting that into tools, like their SIM monitoring tools, they're not taking the full advantage of this data to make more business, strategy-related decisions, and they're not comfortable yet making, taking action in a urgent way. So how to prioritize and drive other programs through your threat intel. I don't think most organizations are quite there yet. So I think fundamentally we have to build threat intel programs to take advantage of the data that we have today, and then over time the data sharing and other threat intel sources will mature, and in turn the programs within the organizations will mature to take advantage of that.
Good. Yeah, and let me throw another question your way, James, because obviously in your role you consult with a lot of large enterprises, and I said a moment ago that cyber being a significant business issue, that it really is a boardroom issue now. Our senior leaders, our audit committees, our board members, in your experience, are you seeing corporations change the makeup of the board to bring that level of expertise so that the right visibility, the right questions are being asked?
So absolutely, the largest, most sophisticated organizations are adding more cyber savvy board members. But more broadly than that, I think boards are looking to become educated on the topic of cyber, and they're looking for more and more information. So every day in the news, they're bombarded with information about attacks and breaches, and they want to understand, are they susceptible to that? And today, most organizations, the boards, don't ask very effective questions. And so therefore, they need training, often in security fundamentals, to help them be more effective. And so we're seeing this trend to come in and give board presentations and board trainings where just a few years ago to get 10 or 15 minutes was a challenge. We were always the first thing cut from an agenda. Today it's an hour to 2 hours. Come in and spend some time with us and really help us understand this complex issue.
Yeah. And I'm going to put you on the spot, Paul. Pretend you're a board member. I mean, what kinds of things are in your mind that you would want to ask a chief security officer or a CISO in front of you?
Well, number one, I would be very interested in how do I compare to others in my industry? What is my resource expenditure? How does it compare to my others in the same industry? What is our security strategy? And I think this is where maybe kind of the flip side of what James has said. When boards get engaged, it's also the land of missed opportunity on the part of senior IT executives or senior chief information security officers, in that they don't know how to talk to the board. So in other words, the board needs to be trained to ask the right questions, but often it's the CISO or the CIO who gets in and gives a highly technical presentation that goes well over the head of any board member, and they can't digest it in a way that is meaningful, or you'll, and equally, we were talking about this last night, and James and both of you, Brian, you've had the experience with this, is that they will, there's a desire to say, boss, I got it all under control.
Yeah.
You want to look at the CEO and the chairman and the board members and say, it's all good. The reality, as we all know, is often far different from that. So don't let it be a missed opportunity to rack and stack your priorities and resources as to what you actually need to succeed.
Yeah, and I had a conversation with a couple of folks yesterday, and my advice in this area was like poke at the margins. So for instance, a CISO presents his budget, and he says, okay, here are the 4 things I'm going to do in 2016. As a board member, my thinking is, tell me about number 5. I want to know which line item dropped below our approval authority. Talk to me a little bit about that. Mm-hmm. And I think if you explore questions around the margins, you start to develop some very interesting insights. Maybe their 4th program was some cool new technology that he just can't wait to get his hands on, when number 5 might have been a program that gets at a core business risk. And as a board member, you really need to know that those precious resources are being applied to the areas that they're needed the most. So one tip there: find those margins in the CISO's presentation and poke at those. Now, as a CISO, I try to rehearse that myself. I try to figure out what the margins are so that I'm ready when they ask those same questions. Let's switch a little bit to security operations. Most of us say, and I certainly do all the time, that we can't prevent these attacks. I know sometimes for senior leaders, that's a hard thing to hear. But I think it's very important for leaders to understand that bad things will happen to the best of companies. And instead of prevent, the word we really need to substitute is deter. We need to make it difficult. We need to add layers of defense. But we need to set an expectation with leaders that bad things will happen. And what that forces you to do then is to start thinking about your ability to detect anomalous activity and respond effectively to that activity. And that's an area that needs some priority. So that's theory. James, you've spent a lot of time with customers. Have you seen the evolution of security operations to adopt advanced techniques?
Well, absolutely. There's a lot of discussion around that right now. What I find interesting is if you look broadly in the community and across sectors, there's not a standard definition of what security operations includes. And I think traditionally, the most traditional components are things like monitoring and response. We've seen over the last couple of years threat intelligence become incorporated into that. And then our philosophy is that we need to add other components such as vulnerability management and vulnerability identification and even software security into those operations, because all of those capabilities need to be tightly integrated to be effective. So the way we look at a security operation is that first you need to determine the components. You need to initiate that capability with your organization. So if you don't have intelligence today, you need to build an intelligence capability. You need to build a vulnerability management capability. Once all of those components are built, you have to mature those capabilities so that they're running at an efficient level, an effective level, and then you need to integrate them. Threat intelligence should be driving what you're doing from a monitoring perspective, should be driving how you investigate breaches. Conversely, vulnerability management would also help the monitoring folks understand the environment better and how to tune their tools. So initiate, mature, and integrate is the way we think about it. That's to get the fundamentals.
Yeah.
And then this progression, it's not really a shift to proactive, it's the addition of proactive is the way I think about it. I don't think you go away from a reactive monitoring, continuous good hygiene, but you layer on top of that a proactive approach to go out and actively look for things in your environment, not sit back and wait for them to happen to you. And then I think all of that is enabled by security analytics, finding ways to automate and make more efficient all of these processes so that you can do them with a fewer number of people in a more efficient way, and use things like behaviors to identify the malicious activity in your environment.
Yeah, and actually let me pick up on that, fewer number of people, because I think most of us know that that's probably one of the largest challenges we have worldwide today in security, is the lack of trained, skilled, experienced resources. I mean, Paul, what's your experience with that?
Yeah, it is. The resource issues, human resource issues, exceptionally challenging because those people are hard to find, but when you put somebody on the security front line and they're day in, day out seeking to defend a network, 24/7, it's an exhausting job. And there was a presentation given at Black Hat last year on the burnout rate among security operators. And once again, I go back to the model that we're using. We are looking at each individual enterprise trying to protect itself. Those days have to stop. We have to be able to work with other security operators and other companies to leverage their expertise as well in order to make time. And just real quick before we go on to the next, I want to back up one point, and that is, I sit on a state commission. The governor of Virginia asked me to help with his commission, and we worked for 2 years, and we put out this great report. And then when we put out the great report, we met with the governor last week, and he asked, what changed in the 2 years? And what's changed in the 2 years is, at least in the United States, we've had breach on the brain. We always think about an attack is a breach of personally identifiable information, it's credit card data, it's that type of activity. Stop. We're always going to have that kind of activity, but what's happened even in the past 6 months is that now we're seeing attacks against critical infrastructure. We're seeing that the bad guys are using things like ransomware to actually shut down or impede operations, where hospitals are not able to operate, where power generation facilities are not affected, are affected. And that's a wholly different type of problem than we've seen in the past. And it just within the past couple of weeks, W2, we have a tax form that everybody gets inside the United States, and we have bad guys going after tens of companies at the same time. So to individually work with this data and try to individually fight doesn't make any sense anymore. And so that's why thinking collectively or in a connected sense of how we solve these problems, so we can leverage each other's operations, leverage each other's insights on real incidents, and leverage personnel across between enterprises is so important.
Yeah, good. Let's switch gears a little bit and just maybe offer perspective. Obviously, we have a Latin American audience. Are there anything? Obviously, cybersecurity is a global issue. Yet there may be some regional differences and a pace at which cybersecurity programs evolve regionally. Do you have a perspective on specifically for Latin America?
Yeah, so I think these are always tough kind of questions, right? Because different countries within Latin America can be more or less advanced, and obviously different organizations within those countries can have certain strengths and weaknesses. I think if I paint a broad brush, I would say that my experience has been that alignment with business risk has not been captured as much as I've seen in other regions of the world, and I think that drives a lack of understanding around the risk, a lack of alignment with the value of intellectual property, which drives a lack of investment, which drives a lack of resources. And so,
cycle.
You get less identification of issues, which then comes full circle, so there's less interest in seeing it as a business risk. So that's the challenge that I've seen. The opportunity for Latin America, I think, is to take advantage of all the lessons that's been learned in all the other regions of the world to leap forward. So while it's been a slower progression for many other regions, Latin America has the advantage of jumping maybe a couple years ahead of where it took many other regions 2 or 3 years to make that progression.
Yeah, I love that point. We kind of assume that everybody has to kind of pass through this evolution, this life cycle, but why don't we just cut it short, right? And jump ahead? And I think there's an opportunity, and we're going to talk about that in a second with architectures, but I just want to get your perspective on specifically around Latin America.
Yeah, I agree with everything James said. I think that in one sense, Latin America might be, if you will, on the traditional infrastructure.
Yeah.
Might be behind, might have challenges associated with software that might be faulty or pirated or whatever. However, like James said, I think there's a huge opportunity here because what has changed again is the rapid adoption of the cloud. Yeah. And so, as decision makers out in the audience, the traditional model, you can leapfrog. You can leapfrog ahead into a space that you have far more management tools at your fingertips, far more understanding of the metrics of how your systems are working than we ever had in the past. And so I do, and yet the one last point, and I think given the almost comical political environment to the north, if I can leave it like that, learn your own lessons, do your own thing. Don't necessarily listen to everybody to the north, especially right now. There's some good people up there, believe it or not. But at any rate, I do think it's important that you find your own way. But I think the cloud infrastructure offers a huge opportunity not only for Latin America, South America, around the rest of the globe.
Yeah, and that's a great segue because I think as we think new models, we kind of drop down and actually think about the security architectures. And I know we chatted a little bit last night. We kicked around some ideas, but anything you want to share in terms of how our architectures are changing?
For me, this concept that the architectures are obsolete, I don't know that I've completely bought into the premise that the principles around those architectures are wrong. I think a lot of those principles are correct. The challenge I've seen more has been the actual adoption of those principles, right? And so when I go into an organization and they tell me their model on paper, and then we assess their models, in reality, they're never the same. Yeah. And so the actual adoption of these principles like least privilege and segmentation and encryption and authorization, those types of things on paper are still there, and they're still good principles. They've just not been adopted in the traditional environments, and making those changes are very challenging and time consuming.
Yeah. One of the risks if we don't change our architectures, though, is I think we have a chance that we will continue to add complexity. Yeah. I spoke to somebody that's in this room yesterday, and a lot of our security technology in the past decades has a fatal flaw somewhere. Antivirus just really doesn't work, and so we add a more sophisticated malware technology, and then that's proven to have difficulties, and we beef up our intrusion prevention. And then that has some flaws, and we start to move further out to the endpoint. And what it feels like is we just keep adding complexity. And I say this over and over again, that complexity is the enemy of security. So we've got to find a way to simplify and really kind of come back to some of the basics. I like your point on principles. Keep the principles in mind, but think about different ways to implement those principles. And absolutely. Paul, you touched on it a moment ago too. I think what's exciting about cloud computing is it's really a catalyst to force us to think differently and change the way we do security. Do you see that happening?
Yeah, and I can actually give you hard examples. Yeah. We have what we call our Security One initiative at our company. And so we have companies like Slack, SendGrid, Trello, Airbnb, all these cloud-based companies. And so we get on the phone with them and we talk to them about what we're doing at TrueStar. And they're like, we do have a security person. He's not necessarily working all the time, but we are using Rackspace, Amazon, Google, Azure, because there's a feeling it's more secure inherently in the end. They want to have somebody who's tracking it, but these are security operators that are beginning to collaborate with each other from the beginning and recognizing the power of the cloud for what they want to do.
Yeah. And as you told us at the outset, you're kind of an optimist. I'm an optimist as well, and so I've found myself saying since the day I joined Rackspace that one day, very soon, security is going to be a very important reason why consumers come to the cloud. I really believe with the opportunities in the cloud that you truly can be safer in the cloud. I see we're out of time, so we're going to kind of cut to a single word answer here. The final question of the day: are we safer in the cloud? Can you be safer in the cloud?
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, very good.
You save money too.
All right, thank you for your time. We're here all day, so if there's anything we can answer for you, have a follow-on conversation, we'd be very happy to do that. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Thanks, Paul.
All right, Brian. Thank you very much. Paul, James, thank you for your time and sharing the information with us. Thank you. Okay, bueno.
Very well. I would like to think that you're ready for a break. It was a very long morning, full of information with many presentations, but we wanted to make sure that all these conferences and all these experiences would be shared here. So we're going to continue with the rest of the day. We're going to give you some time so you can visit this solution pavilion. As you know, it is outside where the tables are placed, and you'll find a lot of Rackspace experts about different solutions and all the sponsors that have their own tables. You can approach them and they will give you more information. We ask you to please look around before lunch. And what we're going to do in the afternoon after the solution pavilion, we're going to come back to the room that is next to this one to have lunch. The lunch would be ready at 1:30, so we'll see you there. And afterwards, we will immediately start with the breakout sessions. That's what we're going to have after lunch. We're going to have 2 initial sessions, then we will have 3, and we'll come back at 4:30 sharp to this room so we can work on the second and last panel with our clients and the closing session with our CTO from Rackspace. Well, very quickly, as a reminder, the surveys will be collected in the end. We're going to give you a small token for them, and I want to remind you that we have a simultaneous translation. We have headphones if you want them for the session with our CTO, which is going to be held in English. You can get your headphones in the registry area without any problem. And in that session, we're going to have a very interesting surprise. So please don't miss it. It's going to be extremely interesting. And thank you for your time. Thank you for this morning. We hope you enjoyed the next sessions. I'll see you later for the closing of the event.